Hello and welcome to the Storytelling with Puck podcast. We will, as always, start with a story.
The story I'll read for you is called Summertime at Granny's House. Now, my granny was an amazing woman, and you'll get a taste of what she's like and what summertime was like in the Caribbean with my granny, Lynette. Do you remember the long days of your summer holiday with nothing to do but play? We were sent to Granny's house to spend our summer holiday, and we all rebelled at how Granny lived in the country and she doesn't have a telly. We told our mother we don't want to go. There was one bus that could take us to Granny's house, a bus called Progress. The bus was strapped with sugarcane, breadfruits, yams, bags and baskets, and bananas that belonged to the hagglers. Because Jamaica had a hilly interior, the bus would drive through the valley to get to Granny's house. And for us, that was a 5 hour trek. The engine would choke sluggishly in fourth gear through mountain roads, twisting and turning. Granny's house had 4 bedrooms. There was a kitchen and a bathroom outside, but if the weather was fine, we were expected to use the facilities outside. Granny's house didn't have a number in the district. They didn't have a post office either. They have a PA, and that's a postal agency. I asked Mama, how can we be sure that we have reached Granny's house? She said, press the bell as soon as you see the jackfruit tree. Can you imagine? 3 little girls on a bus looking for a jackfruit tree all night. We finally arrived at Granny's house and she hugged and kissed us. She was so happy to see us. But in no time, Granny got down to business. Granny had 3 rules. Empty the chamber pots first thing in the mornings, eat what you're given, and do not touch her vanity set. I got up one morning and I realized Granny's kitchen was pitch black with smoke. You can't see properly in the kitchen, and your eyes would water from the sting of the smoke that came from the wood fire. While I would squint when looking for ingredients, Granny knew where every seasoning was. There was a small window to the right of the kitchen, and she had no electricity in there. There was a piece of chicken wire that hangs precariously over the wood fire. And you know what Granny called that? She called that her kreng kreng. That's what Granny used to smoke her own meats. It wasn't a surprise to see a pig's tail pressed against it whenever you look up. Granny had a large pot with 3 legs that was always bubbling away violently like a witch's cauldron. And each bubble would bring up the odd green banana or dumpling. The pot was made from cast iron, and after you have had dinner from it, your iron intake would never deplete. On Sundays, Granny puts on her Sunday best to get ready for church. As one of her rules was not to go into her bedroom, I would peep through the crack of her bedroom door. When Granny takes that bright pink powdered puff and doused herself with powder, you can't see anything in the room. And in that moment, I pictured Granny appearing on Stars in Their Eyes, saying, tonight, Matthew, I'm going to be Mahalia Jackson or Aretha Franklin. When the time came to leave the country, I realized that the country had become my Garden of Eden. I was allowed to lounge guilt-free under the intense expanse of blue sky, to dream and laugh and be, with no prospect of being disturbed to complete any urgent task. Granny's telly was there for all to see. There was so much beauty in the country. There were pine trees swaying in the gentle breeze, banana trees, cocoa and coffee beans, yams, potato, and sugarcane. The crickets chirped in the darkness while the ants gathered food for the rain and the storms ahead. The rooster struts proudly around the kitchen coop, and the hen scratched for the odd worm or two. And my cousins and I, we played from dawn until dusk. Our favorite game was to catch a firefly, or we call them peeny wally in the Caribbean, and placed it in a bottle and watch as it lights up the room with its gentle glow. My cousins pushed me around in a wheelbarrow. We used catapult to knock out birds and roast them. We picked mangoes, oranges, and guavas, and we only got back to the house for tea. My granny, Lynette Stanberry, she is the Rock of Gibraltar. I call her Venus on a mountain. She is the government of her land. She was a woman imbued with a clear spirit and an intrepid will and a burning love to make the countryside her oasis of calm. She lived off the bounty of the land and concocted a mixture of herbs to make her own medicine from the plants within her grasp. In an article written by Children's First magazine, it stated that children who are given the opportunity to have contact with nature through unstructured play have better physical health, increased creativity, reduced stress, and a greater awareness of the natural environment. Today, I can say I am part of that statistic simply because of my granny, Lynette Stanberry. Thank you.
Oh wow, your granny sounds amazing. Thank you so much, Kayla. Before we start, a little note to anybody who is listening for the first time or anybody who has forgotten. My name is Stefano. I run Puck Creations and I am the regular host of this podcast. If the title, Storytelling with Puck, has not given it away, this podcast is all about stories like the wonderful story that you just heard. We will share stories, chat about stories, and see how stories fit in with the business world too. Of course, we couldn't do any of that without our wonderful guests. So let's start by properly introducing tonight, Matthew. This is going to be Kayla Conley. Kayla, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Oh, wow. I always work with clients on this, and now I feel like I'm struggling. So,
You'll be great.
put it in a nutshell. I'm a woman from the West Indies. I've lived in the UK for over 22 years, and I'm now a public speaking coach simply because the journey started in the Catholic Church in Jamaica. When I was 10 years old, I was asked by the priest to read in church, and that started a journey which I didn't know would take me this far in my life today. It started with Father Brian asking me to read in front of so many people every Sunday. There were times when I messed up really badly, times when I let him down. And I had to learn and move beyond that. And what changed the journey for me, a younger priest took over who I had to read for every Sunday. And he helped me with my volume, my pausing, all the pronunciations that I just messed up or fluffed my words over. He got that right. He had that calm center.
What was his name, that younger priest?
His name was Devon Nash. Still remember. And he would say to me, I'm at the back of the church, but I can't hear you. You need to extend your voice. So luckily, he caught me at the right time. And I started high school, and the principal always called on me to do talks, deliver talks. He thought there was something there, which I couldn't see. I did it because you can't say no to the principal.
That's true.
You just can't. In the end, I looked back, and it was 6 years of training I got there.
Wow.
6 years of delivering vote of thanks, introducing teachers, guest speakers, and becoming the valedictorian for my graduating class. That did feel like a big gig. But when you're 16 or 17, you just do it and continue with your life, isn't it?
Yeah, that's true. It's interesting. I think when we look back, sometimes that we, in the moments, don't realize all of the different experience, how different experiences are shaping us, how
Yes.
they are potentially an ingredient for what we're going to do when we're older. I used the word
Yes.
ingredient, I think, because I was inspired by your first story.
Yes.
But yeah, you're right. You're right. There's definitely and I mean, it's very vivid for you, the idea of starting in church, having to read, and there's something important about that, actually. I'm not religious myself, but I was brought up as a religious in a religious family, and
Yes.
we used to go to church, and I used to have to read aloud, and it's something
Yes.
which wasn't really taught as much in school, but was very much taught in church. So I pictured that when you mentioned it,
Yes.
and you can tell that you project your voice, and that you are able to reach the audience, and it's.
I did find it difficult because I was pretty shy as a child.
And so overcoming that, did that come from the younger priest?
It did help because I felt like I had to, metaphorically speaking, step into a bigger shoe that can really fit me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I can understand that, and I think it's interesting. You had that experience when you were younger.
Mm-hmm.
So many people go through that experience now as adults too.
Yes.
So many people often think, and I'm one of them. I'm sure you are as well. Still, with certain subject areas, oh, I couldn't possibly do this.
Mm.
I have no experience in this. How could I possibly go in that direction?
Yes.
Does knowing that you were able to overcome shyness to then have that 6 years of training, as you mentioned, informal training, the school time training, does knowing that help sometimes when then you're challenged with something which isn't in your comfort zone, that that you've overcome something like that before?
It does help. I believe when my clients work with me, it's the same process I use. They don't come, you don't come to me knowing, but I expect you to do without realizing that you're getting there, because it becomes joyful,
Yeah.
isn't it?
Yeah.
There's nothing attached to what you're doing. So when we were in the training room and I said, just tell me how you make your breakfast. Yes, share with me how you make your favorite sandwich. Yes, that's it. It shouldn't be hard. And
So
when I was,
with those questions,
Mhm.
I think I can work it out in my head, but maybe for the listener, and maybe I'm getting it completely wrong. What's the purpose of asking those questions? What are you trying to get your clients to do?
It's tap into their creativity. Once you understand that this is something that's just there and you power yourself up with that, you can sell any sandwich. You can share that, and it becomes a story, but it becomes who you are.
So, in essence, if they come away from your training and they've got used to the idea of explaining the small things almost in story form,
Yes.
then everything starts to become explained in story form. Is that?
Yes. Everything becomes, because all we do, if we give a 60 seconds pitch, it is a story.
Yeah.
You do a presentation, it is a story. It all depends on, as my mom would say when she used to ask me something quickly in the Caribbean and I have to think, she always go, "Me no want a long story." Because you have to explain and explain and explain, and that's it. You don't want any long story. But for Granny's house, how I've written it, if I needed to do it for 10 or 15 minutes, you can have add-ons. I could really bring the audience to Granny. Who is this woman? Who is Granny? So for the introduction, I wrote here, my granny's name is Lynette Stanberry. She looked after many cousins and her nieces and nephews. and everyone called her Aunt Net. So it's Lynette moving to Aunt Net. My mother called her Aunt Net, and I called her Aunt Net too. But all the locals called her Miss Nettie. So you're bringing it down. She was Lynette, she became Aunt Net, and the locals called her Miss Nettie. That's more a term of endearment. We love it's Miss Nettie, isn't it?
It is. I love that, and I love I love that what you're doing there. People talk about painting scenes with stories, and often what they're referring to is painting an actual picture of the place that you're in. So potentially,
Yes.
either telling people or better sometimes showing people a room or an environment. But what I love is that I also think that you're painting a picture, you're painting a scene, and you're painting a scene of the whole town and also your family environment. And but with just those few words, because all you're saying is, this is how we described our granny. This is how the family described. But then this is how everyone else in the town described. And almost automatically, I'm picturing you in the house talking and explaining in that way. And then I'm picturing a whole town, a whole village of people, and how they are, suddenly I've got this whole picture of this place in my mind. And you haven't mentioned one bit about the environment yet. You haven't mentioned one bit about the house or the town and what it looks like, but I can picture it because of the way you've explained the relationship with your granny. And I think there's something special about being able to paint a scene without actually painting the scene, if that makes sense.
That's interesting. See, you bring this out to me.
I just talk a lot of nonsense. That's all. But you don't talk nonsense. And I listening to your story, there were other things I kept on wanting to almost interject on, but then I wanted you to finish the story, so I didn't. Certain areas towards the end, you talk about the idea of the contact with nature and the studies that have talked about contact with nature and how invigorating it can be for especially a child, but also coming into adulthood, both physical and mental health. What I love about your story is that, again, you painted the idea in all of our heads of you being within that nature. And there were these moments interspersed throughout where you had the stars in their eyes smoke coming up, and you also you also had kind of the smoky room when you were looking for ingredients as well, which are taking you kind of away from that nature a little bit, but still in a very, very kind of happy environment. But then you move on to the ideas of the pine nuts, the banana, the cocoa, the coffee. And I feel like I'm there, and I feel like I'm getting a taste of that nature. What inspires you to describe things that way? Does it just come from inside, or does it come from some kind of, I guess, technical ability or understanding of how to write these?
It's not technical, because after I've written this and a few other stories, I had to go and do a storytelling course.
Okay.
Because I can work with clients on what they're not doing, but the technique behind it, that I had to go and study that. And my belief is, if you write from your roots, right from here, without judgment, it will come. If we sit and we think, I can't do this, that's the first thing, or I can never say that. There's always a way you can say something. There's always a way you can put it to your audience so that they understand you are on the same page with them. There's a way to do it, but the easiest way is to just be there. And that's what I did. I went back to the country to write this.
Oh, really?
No, in my head, in my mind.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Yes, in my mind, I went back there. And if you can imagine, stretch your creativity that far, imagine that far, you literally smell what's going on around you. You can get that immersed in it if you're writing it just from here.
So with the idea of it coming from your heart, with the idea of you expressing yourself from a deep emotion, something that really resonated when you said that is we often speak about a moment in time. We often speak about the fact that a story doesn't have to be this big explosive story. And as you said, when you were asked to keep it short, tell me what's going on, keep it short. We don't want the whole story.
Yes.
But you can still tell a story if you are just mentioning something that happened and kind of what went before and what the end result was.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason I think what you said then resonated with that is because it's all to do with a feeling. When you have a memory in your head, when you have a moment in time in your head, it comes sometimes from you smell something, and you smell your granny's food. You smell
the earth.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, right when you're talking to me now, I see the tall banana trees.
Oh, amazing.
In front of her house, many banana trees, and the coffee and the cocoa beans, they're right there, right there. And my friend that I share many stories with in lockdown, I always talk about how my grandmother made her own chocolate tea.
I think now is a good time for you to tell all of our listeners how that happens too, if you wouldn't mind.
Well, when the cocoa pod is ripe, she would slash the cocoa pod. She would take the insides out, and she had a little cemented square. It's almost like a box made from cement, and she would call that her barbecue. When I went to the country and she said, "You put it on the barbecue," I'm thinking of course, the American-looking barbecue, what they have in Australia and many places around the world. No, not in Granny's house. It's a little square thing made from cement, and you put the cocoa pods there. Put the pods there, and the sun would dry that out with time.
Mm-hmm.
And once that's dried down, she had a giant mortar. It's not the little pestle and mortar thing we have here. It's big. It's almost as tall as me with a massive stick in the middle.
You need 2 hands or maybe 4 hands, 2 people.
You do. Yes. And you'd put the dried cocoa pods there and beat them until they look buttery. They look buttery. Okay. She would scoop that together, pat it, and make a cake. And every time you need some chocolate tea, as she calls it, she would grate a little and she boils it until you see that the oil rise to the top. And you say, yes, you are there. And she sweetens it with her condensed milk, some nutmeg. We love to use nutmeg in the Caribbean. Mm-hmm. Yes, sometimes she puts some cinnamon stick in it. And oh my gosh, you sip that and you'll never forget, Stefano. You'll never, ever forget.
I at the moment, all I want to do now is be there. And have the chocolate tea. I think all of our listeners will as well. I think they'll be
Granny's kitchen and her way of cooking. It was such a no stress life, isn't it? Yeah. That's what I saw from her, a real life of living freely, not with I can't do this or I can't say that. She just lived. And my LinkedIn post that I spoke about something like bringing stories to life, mm-hmm. I found a stack of letters from her. And these were written in 2001.
Okay, so quite a while ago now, 20 years ago.
Yeah, yes.
And so those letters, were they thoughts that she had? Were they things that were on her mind? Were they just talking about life? What were they about?
It was talking about life. But what I liked about it, I could tell she was writing bits of Jamaican patois in between.
Oh, amazing.
So she would say to me, "Oh, you know, this has happened, but don't tell anyone I say it because they will say I chat too much." And you see she put chat, chat, chat. So it's written there 3 times.
Uh-huh.
So Granny knew the power of 3, even though she didn't go to school. Yes. And that's when you look back at the letter, you see her, this woman with this presence. She's back there.
I love what you say there. I love two things that really stand out for me. So, firstly, quite often people learn the power of persuasion and the power of talking and expressing yourself to convince somebody else to do something, or just to entice them to read something or listen to something without any formal training at all. It's how we grow up. It's how we learn through life. It's life skills, I guess
It
you could
is.
say.
Yeah.
But the second thing you mentioned was about how you could see her as you were reading those letters. You could feel her. You could you almost be listening to her.
Yes.
And the reason I think that's so important is we often talk to our clients about your tone of voice and how you are connecting with all of the actions you take
Yes.
to your audience and what that means. And sometimes people, I think, have a misunderstanding that tone of voice is purely what we're doing now, how we're speaking to each other, what our tone of voice is at the moment. But tone of voice comes through in everything. It comes through in the pictures you draw. It comes through in the writing, in the letters that you write to people. And that's why this is so important. And it's when we talk about branding, we talk about consistency throughout all of your actions. And you mention in there that you could immerse yourself, I guess, in the environment of your granny's home, and you were there listening to her, even though you were actually reading. I think that really connects well with the idea of tone of voice. Do you think about that at all? Do you think about that?
Yes, I do. I guess for most people, someone like yourself or me, it's when you work with a client to help them to understand that they have a tone and it's unique to them.
Yeah,
isn't it?
that's it.
Yes, you've worked with many different brands and companies, and you, because of the work you do and you understand, you can see that tone. I can, yes, but it's helping our clients to realize that's unique to you, it's unique to your business, and that's the sweet spot.
I like that. I might steal that off you. I might
Yeah,
start saying it's the sweet spot.
it is the sweet spot.
Yeah, that's brilliant. That's a really good way of explaining it. Because you're right, there is a sweet spot. There is a point where suddenly things start to connect and people start to see you and understand you and realize who you are
Yes.
it could be a personal brand, but often as a company as well, and how you are interacting. And I think the sweet spot, I like the idea of the sweet spot.
Fantastic, fantastic.
So with all of this, people might be wondering, well, who is Kayla? What does she do? And how do you, I guess, get to explain to people how to communicate with others? So you came and you had this incredible training before you were even officially doing what you were doing. Yes. But tell me a little bit more, and tell audience a little bit more, maybe about some of your speaking roles.
Okay.
The Women's Institute, for example, and
Yes.
your stories play a part there as well.
Yes. So I was a member of Toastmasters for a long time, and
sorry to interrupt. We should maybe explain to people what Toastmasters is as well, if that's
okay. So Toastmasters is an international body that helps people to show up and be confident speakers. But the minute I got there, I just immersed myself. It's almost like stories started to pop out of my head, stories that were hidden. And the first one I ever wrote, my icebreaker speech was one on learning to ride a bicycle. And the beautiful thing about a story like that is it shows that we're all vulnerable. We all have that thing that we don't want anyone to know about us.
Yeah.
And I remember sharing with them that how can you tell someone you have an MBA but you can't ride a bicycle? It doesn't make sense. And for me, that's what led me to learning to ride this bicycle, but to relate it to others in the room, to say this is how I felt. That's a good exercise. So I found myself writing about lots of experiences. I wrote a speech about a hurricane, what it's like to really witness the fullness of a hurricane in Jamaica. And I called it the unwelcomed guest.
This seems like a good time to remind you that you are listening to a very welcome guest, the renowned speaker, trainer, and wonderful human that is Kayla Conley, on the Storytelling with Puck podcast. We'll be hearing a lot more about food, stories, and Kayla herself. We will, as always, finish with a Puck Creations tale, but before we get to that, let's find out more about Kayla's unwelcome guest.
I remember describing how the thunder clapped, because that's what we always say. My mom always say, you hear thunder clapping out there? That's the word we use to describe the power. So we say, the thunder clapped, the lightning flashed, and the rain hissed against the louver windows. That's how I summarized what happened when it all started.
And what did you feel throughout those occasions? What kind of emotions were you feeling as that was happening?
The emotions, it's never one of fear. It's always one of gratitude that the family's okay and we are okay. And I look forward to the dishes my mom would cook. we make saltfish fritters, and I can smell it right now. The dried cod beaten with she'd put that in flour with salt and pepper and that seasoning we call thyme, and something is going to be cooking in my mother's kitchen. There is that, and we have roast breadfruit. Oh, so nice. So when we have that warm weather, that's the things you look forward to, those real comfort food, nice stews that start from morning until evening. The food plays a big part in what we do. But when I share that experience, I also share the what it's like when life has stopped for a while and you have to rebuild your lives again.
Yeah, that can't be easy, but I like what you say about the idea of, fear is not your first emotion there. It's not even really an emotion that you sense most of the time. And actually there's almost an excitement. You're looking forward to something else. And there's
Yes.
Sorry, go on.
Excitement because of human nature. We used to get really scared when there's a hurricane, and my dad would look at us and go, "You think this is a storm?" He would be all manly about it. He would say in Jamaican patois, "This is no storm. This is no storm. You should see Hurricane Charlie." I think it was 19 something, whatever. But he used to be like, nothing is bigger than Hurricane Charlie. And as a young girl, I used to think, well, this might sound bad, but I want my own storm. And it did come. Our own storm came in 1989. Everyone remembered Hurricane Gilbert. Everyone remembered.
So that was your extreme moment. And in some ways it felt like, I don't want to project actually my thoughts here, but was it almost a, hey, I've now got my piece of the pie. I've got my story to tell. I've got my story that I can talk about.
Yes, but when you are young, you can't see how terrible this thing is. You in your mind's eyes, you think it will pass for a week and that's it. And I remember, this is when I remember how intuitive and brave my mother was. My sister had to get to an exam center, and only an army vehicle could pass through those waters.
Wow.
And I remember we were thinking she had to get there. We don't know how the other students will get there. The island is all underwater. And she asked these men to take her daughter as far as they possibly could so she could sit her exam.
And did they?
And they did. Everything, it just happened. When you have that moment where you look back and you think, wow, that's the strength my mother has. Yeah. She had that inner knowing that, as they always say, what, come hell or high water? Have you heard that?
Yes.
She will get to the exam center and she will do her exam. And that's a place in your life where you move beyond fear. you move beyond fear, because if you really think of what might have happened or the other side, you'd never put your child in that situation.
Of course. Yeah. That's really interesting because, as you say, I mean, the events surrounding hurricanes from a from an objective, from an outsider looking in, often I have fear of what's going on, and I'm nowhere near the hurricane. I'm seeing what's happening in. Often it is in the Caribbean, but I think sometimes the name changes to typhoon and tornado,
Yes,
etc.
cyclones, and yes, you have different
But
names.
the different parts of the world, and it truly is a tragedy, and it's so many people lose their lives, and so many people lose their homes, and as you say, you have to rebuild again.
Yes.
Which is why when you explain it the way you explain it, even I'm getting a different feeling about it, because you're explaining how you had a completely different sensation to potentially what your peers around you. I know you can't speak for everybody who was there at the time, but also to me, not this particular hurricane, but whenever I see a hurricane from a distance,
Yes.
and it's almost a privilege for me to be able to have the fear, because I can be scared for you from the outside, because in some ways I know that nothing is going to happen to me watching.
Well, that's true. Yes.
Yeah. And I don't have to overcome the fear to get on with life and to do something else. Whereas you and your mum, it's like, well, we could be scared, or we
Yes.
could do.
It becomes day to day until it becomes day to day. So you know that the waters will subside. And in that story, which I'll share with you another time, I spoke about how we share stories under the moonshine because we have no electricity. For a while, you have no electricity. And I spoke about that a famous Jamaican dish called dip and fall back.
Tell our listeners, what is it?
Well, in my talk, I said you use the banana for a dipstick, you fall back and enjoy. That's the long and short of dip and fall back.
I love it.
Yes. But when we have the wet season, the hurricane season, you're just on your guard. You have to keep your clothes clean at all times because they get damp sets in really quickly. It's just because of the nature of the weather system you're dealing with. But the basic thing about life is understanding it's day to day until you get going again. It's not a rush. You bide your time, as they say. And my mom would go and help neighbors wash mud off their walls. She was this real stalwart, this woman who she'll get things done. She'll go, don't stand there and look at me and think that today's the day you're not going to school and you won't be doing anything. Miss so-and-so, and bring dinner up for so-and-so. And that's my mother. And you understand that in hurricane. It's time to really give what you can, do what you can. So it teaches you a lot.
I can tell. And to see this from the outside, and to hear you explain it, it gives me a warmth actually about humanity, because we see so often when you're in your own world and you're watching things on the news and you don't spend enough time with people, especially at the moment.
Yes.
You see so much negativity. You see things that people are constantly doing wrong, how people aren't helping each other, how people are committing crimes or whatever it is that they're doing. But the stories of joy, the stories of hope, the stories of help, the stories of working your way out day by day, biding your time, having and it is a virtue of patience.
It is.
They're not told often enough. And the way you tell that, it genuinely, I'm sitting here just feeling warm right now. Even though you're actually talking about what is quite a severe tragedy, but I'm feeling so warm because of the way that you have explained, as you mentioned earlier, the excitement of human nature.
Yes, and if you witness it for yourself, it's as long as you're safe, it's not the worst thing, because after the storms, I always say the sky looked like a giant squeegee has cleaned it. That fresh blue the blue that comes back when you look at it, it looks unreal. It's so fresh. It's beautiful
Wow.
after the storm. And I know it's the same for our lives, but when you witness that in nature, you can really bring it to your own life and realize that the new beginning, it's just amazing. Yeah.
I can see how much it means to you as well as you talk about it. It's
Yes, I share that with my teenager at times, because as human beings, there are bumps in the road. We always see bumps, and it's how long it takes you to get over it, isn't it?
it is, it is.
Yes.
And that perspective that you then offer your teenager, that's I think really important, that sometimes they are bumps in the road that we're overcoming, but they feel like mountains. But as you
Yes.
say, really they're bumps.
Yeah.
You can get over them and you can come back from them. And I think that's when you have that sense of perspective that you're offering, that will help a lot to realize that you can overcome pretty much anything.
Yes, we still, I do believe we still need wisdom from what I call our elders, the
Yeah.
older generation, who just sums up life in one sentence and you get it.
Yeah.
You remember those days? I sound pretty old now, but
Not at
but
all.
that's it. That was the wisdom of all time. You just see somebody like my granny, my mom, my aunts, just older people. They just say, Stefana, but why you don't do so and so? And you think, it never came across my mind. But no,
Yeah.
she said it. I get it.
Just one sentence and it's enough.
It was succinct. It was enough. And that always brings me back to my granny. No fuss life. And I remember one day we were there with her, and tea in the morning wasn't any fancy Yorkshire tea or PG tips or whatever tea bag. She just peeled the orange, let it sit in some hot water.
Uh-huh.
That's the flavor. She put a little sugar on it, and that was our tea for the morning.
That actually sounds really nice. I might go downstairs and do
But
that.
that was so many times we might not have the tea bag in our kitchen, but we think, oh, we have an orange, but use what's in the orange, isn't it? Use
Yeah.
what's in the orange. So my grandma, my mom, a lot of women I've grown up around, they had that inner knowing, that one thing they tell me, and I think it just makes sense right now. So wisdom from the elderly, in my view, is wisdom that we all need, because it's almost, it lingers forever. It never leaves you.
I completely agree with that. And actually, sometimes I think in some modern Western societies, we forget about how much elderly people have to offer because they have so much to offer.
They do.
And coming back to, what we've been doing for this whole podcast and what the idea of the podcast is all about, it's all about stories. But if you really want to hear the greatest stories, go and speak to somebody who's in their 70s or their 80s and let them just tell you about their childhood, let them tell you about their life and the things that have happened to them. And throughout their stories, you will also
Yeah.
get those nuggets of wisdom that you spoke about.
There is so much. And in my granny's letters to me, she said in one of them, it was only yesterday, I remember running down the hill from school with my lunch pan. And my sister and I, we always say, there must be a grandparent who was born in slavery. But we came in and no one spoke about that. She spoke about the joys of being alive.
Wow.
She just got up, and I said to my mom, but look at the house that she lived in. It was much bigger than we thought. More was happening than we thought. She had land. She was making her own sugar. When I got to Granny's house, this is something I could put in the story another time. Granny had a mule outside at the back of the kitchen, and the mule was blinkered and it was going around in a circle. And I called my mom and I said to her, why is there a hot space in the middle of the ground? And why is the mule going around in a circle? And she said, go and look and see what your grandmother is doing. Granny had a tiny turbine and she pushed the sugarcane right through it. The juice from the sugarcane ran to the bottom. And my mom said at the bottom, we make something called a kettle. The cane juice goes in and that's the boiling starts. Granny was making her own sugar. She knew how to make her own sugar. And that sugar isn't processed. So my dad called it wet sugar. It's not molasses as yet, but it's still slurpy and syrupy. And you can see the grains are coming, but they're not fully there. And that's Granny ran the entire household. We had wet sugar. Yeah.
It's incredible. It's a completely different world for many of us, and I imagine even for you, in some ways, it's a different world to
Yes.
see all that and to think back to that as well, and to
Yes.
how life is
Yes.
so different now. And it's interesting as well that you talk about the stories that you were always told were always the positive ones, and some of the potential negative experiences that may have happened, and that wasn't spoken about as much.
It's the stories we can all tell, they belong somewhere.
Yeah.
I do believe the biggest mistake is putting a story where it doesn't belong.
Explain what you mean by that more. I think I understand, but explain what you mean by that.
It goes back to really meeting your audience where they're at.
Mm-hmm.
If we're talking about our ancestors, or we want some background, if the purpose of the talk is about that, you can put lots of stuff in there.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could go back to the times, and what you do with a story like that, it needs to be mixed, because at no point life is one way. You have the hurricane, and after that, after the storms, you have the calm, you have the beautiful blue skies after. So there's good and bad in everything.
That's right.
And that's what you bring your audience to, some form of redemption. It can't just be one way. It never was. Because when I looked back, I wrote here about my granny. She had a large 4-bed house with a cellar beneath it, where she dries her bananas on the dried banana leaves. Growing up, we were told that life in the country was hard. My mother had to carry water, and they thought it was a tough life. I remember looking at the graves of my ancestors right at the bottom of Granny's house. My great grandmother and great grandfather were buried there. Aunt Net's husband was called Tom, but everyone called him Uncle Tom. All of us children would play around the graves. We sing songs, we sit on the graves, and Aunt Net would say to my last uncle, I want to be buried next to my parents and right next to Tom. But the beautiful thing, that house, it has so much history, more history than I'll have to go and study. Because if they were poor and life was tough, how? A 4-bedroom house in 1926?
It's a good point, and so sometimes you wonder how it all came about, and I think actually that comes back to the idea then of what we were talking about a second ago, in terms of it's important not to lose some of those stories. It's important not to lose the stories you've told us today.
Yes.
Now give the world a little bit more of a taste of that whole environment.
Yes.
And it's so important that we keep on passing on these stories, and we keep on making sure that people hear these stories and read these stories,
Yes.
so that we don't lose what went before, and so that we can learn from the positives and the negatives of everything that went before, and change the way that we are and the way that we act. And
Yes.
so those stories that you tell, I think, are not only entertaining and warming and make me hungry, but they are also really powerful and important.
Thank you, Stefano. But you can always bring that to your audience. once you're relating from here, you can still allow light and dark to exist. You can do that in a story. But if you bring them down, you have to bring them up. That's the whole thing, because it's energizing the audience so that the engagement remains the same. And as humans, we are very emotional, and we can't control a lot of our emotions. But with awareness, we can figure out how to switch that button. I remember I was asked to give a brief talk shortly after my father died. And I was sharing with the audience that strong man who I lost, that man who I loved so much, and he meant the world to me. And I explained to them how I would see him shaking the tamarind tree, because he would always say to me, let's go and pick some tamarind. And I'd see that strong man. He's a giant of a man. That's me, that little girl, just picking up the dry tamarind. But he's shaking the whole tree and it's coming down. It's really coming down. But that sadness of the loss of this person.
Yeah.
And I could tell the emotions was tipping down. I could see them. They were following me. They knew where I was at. And I said to them, but you know the wonderful thing? After I pick up those tamarind, put them in a bag, I go home and make what I call tamarind ball. Put the brown sugar in my palm and the tamarind from the pod and roll it together. And I lick my palms. There is always joy. There is something, but that's it. Being understanding that the audience, they're walking with you right there and then. They haven't left you. They're there with you. So lift them up, just as though you need to lift up yourself.
I love that, and thank you for sharing. By the way, the story of when your father passed away, and I find whenever sadly I've been to a few funerals, and whenever I go, and as you say, there's people are able to express the celebratory moments, the things that actually made them happy, and so there's a clear sadness, as you say. Everybody's sad because of what's happened.
Yes.
But then we can laugh and we can joke and we can see the light, as you say, I guess, when there is all that darkness. And something when on the morning of my mum's funeral, when I was quite young at the time, and all of our family had come over from Italy and from Ireland, and so we were all gathered in my family home, and we went out into the back garden, and we all were, extremely sad, trying to be jolly, trying to have a laugh and a joke. And so I was a chubby child. Oh, I say child, I was 18. I was a chubby teenager. And I'm a chubby adult too. And my brother was, I've got two brothers, and my brother was doing a kind of a trick, a game, almost a little gymnastic type thing.
Yeah.
Grab, you have to put your head underneath his legs, and he'll grab your hands and flip you around, so that you're supposed to land back on your feet. He did that with my siblings and a couple of other people in the family, and I was like, okay, give it a go. It didn't work out quite so well for me. I pretty much went straight down and smacked my head off the patio in the back garden.
One more problem to worry about on that day.
Exactly. But the thing is, as much as it sounds like it could be horrible and a severe injury, that kind of stuff, it was actually the moment that lit up what was one of the most devastating days for all of us in our lives. And those kind of, as you say, the light sometimes that you get when the tragedy happens, and if you can tell a story in that way. So, I'm talking about my mum's funeral when I was 18. That's an incredibly sad moment, but hopefully when most of the audience are listening, they're seeing that actually it was a very sad moment, but there was the light there, and we were able to kind of work through it. And that's not to say that happens for everybody, because for some people it's impossible to be able to do that. But over time,
yes,
those stories become more palatable, I guess, and you're able to tell them and express yourself.
and you never know. I remember the first client I worked with. I shared the story of losing my dad, and I remember saying to him, "Why did you choose me to work with?" He said, "You have lost your father, and I've lost my parents too."
It's that connection.
It's that connection. Yeah, I mean, he did a fantastic job at the end of the training, but sometimes that's not what people look for. They look for a common thread. They look for some commonality somewhere, and they think, yeah, he likes iced tea. I like iced tea too. You drink Guinness? Yeah, see me see me next week. Let's have some Guinness.
You know what? I think that is a perfect moment actually to maybe start to wrap up the podcast, because I think that line that you just said there is perfect about the idea that we connect through commonalities. It's not always about what someone can do for you and the benefits that a product offers.
True.
And that is why stories in business are so important.
Yes.
And that is why being able to speak and express a story in front of people is so important. And it's why you should hire Kayla to help you with it. So Kayla, where can people find you if they are so inclined to do that?
Find me on LinkedIn. I hang out with Stefano and lots of cool people on LinkedIn. So
I've never been cool, but thank you very much.
Have a look at my post. So you can find me there, or you can find me on Facebook. And my website is www.kaylaconley.com. Thank you.
Fantastic.
Stefano.
We'll put all of that onto the episode so that people can see it.
Yes.
And as always, we will end as we started with a story. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Seldom do you see tales roaming free. Obscure they are in style, renowned for their guile. Yield. Time is not passing, elves they are chanting. Leprechauns are demanding, lions don't exist. Innocuous they're seeming, never to be dreaming. Gore returns, we're screaming. Writing words that can't be missed. Inhale. Slowly. It's time to take a break. Thoughtless rhymes are no match for the crimes Hercule has on his plate. Perhaps it's not lost. Ugliness. Cured by kindness. Praise one another. Extracting creations hurts like no other. This is not poetry, it's a story. It's rhythm. You and your magic make this podcast happen. You've just been listening to the Storytelling with Puck podcast. We'll be back very soon, so make sure you subscribe and catch up on any of the episodes you've missed.